All right, so we're diving deep today into modern dating and all its, complexities. And we're going to be looking at a specific podcast episode called, get this, Dating Diaries. WTF is wrong with love. And it's pretty amazing, right? Like, it just seems like these days finding love is this crazy mix of excitement and just complete confusion.
Well, and what makes this particular episode so interesting is you have these two hosts, Alex and Taylor, and they have, well, very different views on dating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Alex is like super cynical about the whole thing, especially dating
Oh,
apps.
I bet.
But then you have Taylor, who's, way more optimistic.
That's so interesting. So it's kind of like we're getting both sides of the coin here.
Yeah, go
Because,
ahead.
I mean, we all heard the horror stories about dating apps, but we also know people who found, real love through them.
Right.
So is it just all like a matter of perspective, or is there something, deeper at play?
I think it's safe to say that dating apps are kind of like a double-edged sword. They've opened up so many possibilities to meet people, but they've also kind of created this whole new set of anxieties and challenges that we didn't really have to deal with before.
Yeah, it's almost like they've turned love into a game. Like
Yeah.
you're literally judging people based on what, a couple of photos and a bio?
Exactly. And Alex actually called them digital meat markets.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and I think that really gets to the heart of one of the biggest problems.
Which is,
They contribute to the gamification of love. Swiping through these profiles, it can become almost addictive.
mm-hmm.
And we kind of lose sight that these are actual people with, feelings and emotions.
So, okay, let's unpack this gamification thing a bit more. What does that actually mean for like how we approach dating? Is it making us more superficial or maybe less willing to put in the effort to build a real connection?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I mean, on one hand, yeah, having all these options at our fingertips, it can make us way pickier.
Yeah.
Like you might just dismiss someone for some like tiny little thing because you just know there's hundreds of other profiles waiting for you to swipe on.
Right, exactly, exactly.
But then on the other hand, this constant exposure to all these potential partners, well, that can also make us less willing to settle down. Like we get this fear of missing out.
Oh, the dreaded FOMO. I feel like that's everywhere these days, not just in dating.
Oh, absolutely.
But can you explain a little more about what FOMO is and how it specifically impacts our dating decisions?
Yeah, so FOMO is basically that feeling, that you're missing out on something better, something more exciting, maybe someone more perfect.
Right.
And in dating, it can be that you're always comparing your partner or potential dates to this like ideal version that might not even exist.
Oh, like that voice in your head going, what if there's someone better out there?
Yeah, or what if I'm making the wrong choice?
It's the worst. It's like having more choices doesn't actually make us happier.
Yeah, it's the paradox of choice, right? It can actually lead to more anxiety and just make it harder to make a decision.
Okay, well, speaking of anxiety, let's talk about some of the behaviors that dating apps have fueled, like ghosting and breadcrumbing. I mean, these things existed before, but it feels like they've become so common in the digital age.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's like dating apps have created the perfect environment for these behaviors to, thrive. With all these options and how easy it is to communicate, it's way easier to just disappear from someone's life without a trace. And
Yeah.
you're not seeing the person, face to face. So it's easier to detach emotionally.
That's a really good point. It's almost like the technology makes us less empathetic or less willing to just have those like difficult conversations.
Yeah. And then you have breadcrumbing, which is like ghosting's like sneaky cousin.
Okay.
It's sending just enough like random messages to keep someone interested, but without any real intention of, actually taking things further.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like you're being strung along with the bare minimum and you're constantly checking your phone hoping for like an actual conversation, but you're just getting these tiny crumbs of attention. It's exhausting.
It is. And it really shows a fear of like direct communication. It shows a lack of respect for the other person's feelings and time.
Okay, so we've talked about how dating apps can make love feel like a game and how they contribute to things like ghosting and breadcrumbing. But what about the impact on our expectations? Do you think dating apps are making us more idealistic or maybe more cynical about finding love?
Well, I think it can honestly go both ways.
Okay.
On one hand, we see all these images of, seemingly perfect couples on social media,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that can create these really unrealistic expectations for what a relationship should be like.
It's like everyone else is living their best lives while you're stuck swiping through endless profiles, wondering, like, what are you doing wrong?
Exactly. And it's really easy to fall into that trap of
Mm.
comparison and feeling inadequate.
Right, right.
But on the other hand, being exposed to so many different types of people, it can also like broaden our horizons and challenge our preconceived notions about what we're looking for in a partner.
That's actually a good point. It's like dating apps can be both a blessing and a curse.
Yes, they can make us feel more insecure, but they can also help us grow in ways that we didn't even expect.
Right. And I think that's a huge takeaway so far. Dating apps are a powerful tool, but it's how we use them, you know?
Exactly,
We
exactly.
have to be self-aware.
And use them wisely.
So, to our listeners, we're curious, what are your experiences with dating apps? Have they been more positive or negative in your dating life? Let us know. But before you do that, we're going to move on to the next part of our conversation, where we'll explore how some of these modern dating behaviors are actually playing out in the offline world as well.
It's funny because we often blame dating apps for a lot of the problems in modern dating, but the Dating Diaries hosts made this really interesting point. It's
Yeah.
like some of these behaviors we're talking about are also showing up offline too. Oh, absolutely.
It's like it goes deeper than the tech.
Right. It really stood out to me when they talked about how dating has almost become like transactional, even when you're meeting people in person.
Okay.
Like people approach it with a checklist,
Yeah.
prioritizing these very specific criteria over an actual connection.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like going to the grocery store with a super specific list,
Yeah,
and you're so focused on getting those exact items that you might miss some amazing discoveries along the way.
exactly. Taylor even joked about people treating potential partners like their IKEA furniture,
Hmm.
just scrutinizing them for any little flaw instead of looking at the whole package.
Oh, that's so good. I love that analogy. It's like we're so pressured to find the perfect partner. And I think social media plays a huge role in that too, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it. We're always bombarded with these images of seemingly perfect couples,
Mm.
living these amazing lives on Instagram and TikTok. And it's just so easy to compare and think, wait, what am I doing wrong?
Totally. It's like everyone else is on a permanent honeymoon and we're just trying to get a decent first date.
Exactly. And that just adds to that fear of missing out, that FOMO we were talking about.
Right. So it's not just about finding someone we connect with. It's also about this feeling of, like, have I made the absolute best choice?
Yeah.
But I mean, isn't there always going to be some comparison in dating? Like, how do you balance having standards with being open to those unexpected
I
connections?
think that's the question, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
like finding that sweet spot where you know what you're looking for, but you're also open to the idea that your ideal partner might not fit perfectly into that box you've made in your head.
I love that. Have your non-negotiables, but also be willing to let go of some of those really superficial things and focus on connecting with, an actual human being. But even if you find someone who ticks all the boxes, there's still that fear of vulnerability, right? Like when you open yourself up to love, you also open yourself up to getting hurt.
Oh, absolutely. And I think Alex's story about crying during Toy Story 3 on a date really captures that. It takes so much courage to be vulnerable with someone, especially early on. And if that vulnerability is met with, rejection or even ridicule, it can be really painful.
Oh, for sure. I used to be terrified of showing any vulnerability on dates. Like, I just thought I'd be judged. It took me a while to realize that vulnerability is actually a strength. It's about being authentic and, connecting on a deeper level.
And I think that's so important for our listeners to hear.
Yeah.
Vulnerability can be scary, but it's the key to real intimacy. It's about trusting that the right person will see that as a strength, that they'll meet you with compassion and understanding.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of the challenges, both on and offline. It can feel kind of bleak, honestly. But the Dating Diaries hosts didn't just leave us with, like, doom and gloom. They actually offered some solutions and a more hopeful outlook. Want to dive into those?
Yeah, let's do it. I think one of the most important things they emphasized was managing expectations,
Yeah.
letting go of that fairy tale idea of the perfect soulmate,
Mm-hmm.
accepting that real relationships, they're messy, they take work.
It's so true. We often have this idealized image in our heads, and then we're disappointed when reality doesn't live up to it.
Right. Like we set ourselves up to fail from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that pressure comes from, social media, movies, our families. It's like we need to find the one who will complete us in every way.
But what if that's just, like, a myth?
Yeah,
What if this whole soulmate thing actually keeps us from seeing the awesome people who are right there?
exactly. And that's why managing expectations is so important. It's about being open to different kinds of people, different connections, and realizing that a really fulfilling relationship might not look exactly like what we've always pictured.
So lowering expectations doesn't mean settling. It's about being realistic,
Hey,
open-minded,
exactly. And they also talked about, clear and honest communication.
especially when it comes to ending things. I mean, ghosting might feel easier, but it leaves the other person feeling totally lost and hurt. There's no closure.
Yeah. It's recognizing that even if it's not what they want to hear, honesty and respect, that's what builds trust. That's what maintains healthy boundaries.
Okay, so managing expectations, communicating honestly. What else did they suggest?
Well, they talked about exploring dating options outside of the apps, like joining clubs or groups, things that line up with your interests.
I love that.
It's a way to connect with people who, share your passions.
It takes the pressure off the whole dating thing. It's like you're already part of this community, and any romantic connection is just a bonus.
Yeah,
So it's about expanding your social circle, creating those opportunities for genuine connection, instead of just swiping, swiping, swiping.
exactly. And I think maybe most importantly, they talked about self-love and setting boundaries.
Oh, that's huge. It's like you can't pour from an empty cup. Taking care of yourself, your own emotional well-being, that's what lets you approach dating from a place of strength. But what does, setting boundaries in dating actually look like?
Well, it can look a lot of different ways, but essentially, it's knowing your worth, not settling for less than you deserve. And it's being willing to walk away from something if it's not serving you, even if it means being on your own for a bit.
So it's about recognizing those red flags and being brave enough to say no to things that don't feel right, whether it's like a specific behavior or just a lack of effort. Taylor even gave a great tip about setting a time limit for text replies. Like, if someone takes forever to get back to you, maybe they're just not that invested.
Yeah, it's about having those standards and not compromising your needs, your values, just to please someone else.
It's like be open, be vulnerable, but also protect yourself. Know when it's time to walk away.
Yes. And in the end, that's what it's all about. Knowing yourself, loving yourself, and then finding someone who complements and enhances that.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The challenges, the influence of technology and social media, some solutions for this crazy dating world. But it's important to remember, everyone's experience is unique. What works for one person might not work for another. So to our listeners, what resonates most with you? What are your biggest takeaways from our conversation? Even though we talked about all the crazy stuff happening in dating, the Dating Diaries hosts didn't leave us totally bummed out.
Yeah, they kept it real.
Yeah, amidst all the craziness, they still left us with hope.
Yeah, definitely. They acknowledged all the difficulties, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's not all bad.
Right.
It's about shifting your mindset, approaching dating with, a healthy outlook.
So not giving up on love, just maybe reevaluating our approach, adjusting those crazy expectations we might have.
Right. They reminded us to embrace that vulnerability, prioritize clear communication, and remember, self-love is key, no matter what.
It's about focusing on what we can control, like our actions, how we choose to, navigate this whole dating world. That makes it seem a little less overwhelming.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Instead of getting caught up in the negativity or constantly comparing ourselves, we can just focus on being the best versions of ourselves, attract people who appreciate us for who we are.
Exactly.
Which is so important. It's yes, dating's tough, but it's also a chance to grow, to learn more about ourselves.
It really is.
What we want, what we don't want. And that's so valuable, even if it doesn't end in a relationship right away.
Yeah. Every experience, good or bad, teaches us something.
Right.
It helps us figure out what we're really looking for. It's a journey.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the big takeaways from Dating Diaries. Dating apps, they can be helpful or a nightmare. It's about using them in a smart way. Communication is everything, both when starting and ending relationships. And self-love, well, that's non-negotiable, no matter what stage of dating you're in.
And remember, there's no one right way to date. What works for one person, it might not work for someone else. It's about trying things out, adapting, and finding what feels right for you.
And those Dating Diaries hosts, they showed us that humor and self-awareness, that can really help you through the ups and downs. Don't take things too seriously. Try to enjoy the ride, even when it gets a little crazy.
It's about connection, joy, not just, checking off a list.
Okay, before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with something to think about. If tech is partly to blame for some of our dating struggles, is the answer to disconnect. Ditch the digital world and focus on real-life interactions. Is that how we find real love? Food for thought as you go on your own dating adventures. That's all for our Deep Talk today. Until next time, happy dating!